Magandang araw po mga kaibigan. Ngayon po naman araw na ito, araw ng Lunes, sa atin po namang coffee chat. Inanyayahan ko po si Dr. Chester CABALZA. Siya po ay nakapag-aral sa larangan ng National Security and Policy Making sa University of Delaware. At nakapag-aral din po naman, siya po yung isang PhD in Anthropology. Nag-aral din ng Military Diplomacy sa PLA National Defense University. Magandang pag-usapan. Alam nyo, na-combine sa kanya yung pagkadalubhasa sa pagsusuri sa mga nagaganap sa ating kapaligiran. Magandang hapon po, Dr. Chester CABALZA, and welcome to our coffee chat.
Good afternoon, Sir Melo, at sa lahat ng tagapakinig at nanonood sa ating lahat. Thank you for inviting me again.
Maganda kasing pag-usapan ito. Merong mga pangyayari noong nakalipas na weekend na ikinababahala ng ilan nating mga kababayan. Unang-una, mga 220 pong bangkang pangisda mula sa China ang nakita doon sa isang batuhan na ang itsura ay parang boomerang. At ito raw po ay mayaman din sa likas na yaman, mga isda at iba pa. Ito yung Julian Felipe Reef, kung di ako nagkakamali. Ano po ang inyong pananaw dito, Dr. Chester CABALZA?
Okay, ang ganda, tamang-tama po no, na napapanahon po yung ating pag-uusap ngayon dahil unang-una may tama ho kayo, may nakita nga tayong bagong development dito sa ating problema sa ating South China Sea West Philippine issue. No? Nakikita pa natin ang Scarborough Shoal 2.0 in 2021. Parang ganun yung nangyayari sa ngayon. No? Unang-una, ano ba ang dahilan kung bakit biglang nagpadala ng maraming mga military militia ang China ngayon? This is in response dun sa challenge ng America ng US on their Indo-Pacific region. Alam naman natin na nitong mga nakaraang mga araw lamang nag-usap yung mga leader ng United States at ng People's Republic of China at nakita natin hindi maganda yung kinalabasan ng kanilang pag-uusap sapagkat doon sila nagbuhos ng mga sama ng loob nila. At matatandaan din natin last February 1, meron isang napaka lakas na batas ang China na tinawag nila yung China Coast Guard Law, no, na effective noong February 1. At ito nga ay isang dahilan kung if we could call it some part of their flexing of muscles, no, because basically they really would want to put teeth on their new law. So ano ang epekto nito ngayon sa lahat ng mga nangyayari sa ating kapaligiran ngayon? Unang-una, apektado lahat ng mga claimant countries, lalong-lalo na ang Pilipinas ay naiipit sa ganitong kompetisyon ng malalakas na mga bansa katulad ng Estados Unidos at ng China. So napapagitna tayo at nakita natin na mukhang we are being dwarfed by these two titans na sinasabi na nga natin. No? And technically, because of that, and given the fact that tayo rin kasi yung unang naglabas ng diplomatic protest natin dahil natakot tayo sa kung anong pwedeng gawin ng China, no? Dahil hindi naging malinaw sa atin kung ano ba talaga ang gusto ng China sa kanilang regional security. Malinaw sa atin dahil lumalabas na kaalyado natin ang Estados Unidos, malinaw sa atin kung ano ang plano nila, kung ano ang projection nila, kung ano yung grand strategy nila para sa Pilipinas at para sa regional security. Pero si China na nakikipagkaibigan sa atin, mukhang hindi pa malinaw kung ano yung gusto nila, no? Dahil sa ngayon pinapalakas pa nila yung kanilang bansa at pangalawa, marami rin sila mga issues na kinikriticize sila ng mga malalaking bansa katulad na lamang ng Estados Unidos at ng mga, of course, yung Quad na kasama dyan yung Japan, Australia, India, of course yung US kasama dyan, and of course yung mga liberal countries, Western liberal countries na katulad ng European Union. So ang daming sagabal sa kanilang mga ambisyon kung bakit nagiging ganun yung behavior ng China. Ngayon, isa pa sa naging dagok doon kung bakit nagganun ang behavior ng China dahil nakita nila na yung mga bansa sa Southeast Asia katulad ng Pilipinas lumalaban na rin, no? Katulad ng tayong mga Pilipino at yung Vietnam at yung mga iba pang bansa na may mga interest doon sa pinag-aagawang South China Sea. Ganun kalawak yung diskurso pagdating sa usapin sa South China Sea at kung bakit may mga developments kayo na nangyayari dito sa West Philippine Sea na inaangkin ng Pilipinas.
Napakabigat nitong pangyayaring ito sapagkat maraming nagulat. Pero alam ba kaya natin kung ano magiging impact nito sapagkat samantalang sinabi ng National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea na nakababahala yung pangyayari, sinabi ni AFP Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Cirilito Subihana na bine-verify pa nila yung report at inatasan na niya ang Western Command upang suriin yung impormasyon. Naganap ito noong 7 ng Marso pero anong petsa na tayo ngayon? Pagkatapos, yung press release ng National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea, lumabas noong Sabado. Ang sabi ni Secretary Locsin, ano nangyari? Bakit i-verify pa yan? Naglabas na ng statement yung National Task Force. Ano kayang hiwaga rito?
Okay, yun din yung nagiging problema natin when it comes to generating information, no? Lalong-lalo na ang ating intel community at yung ating mga institutions mukhang may mga hindi synchronized and organized din yung kanilang mga pagkuha, no, pag-gather ng information, and it takes time because when we talk about security, ang bilis, no? Every second of the day maraming pwedeng mangyari. At habang pinoproseso yan, dapat meron ng actions, no? Just like a good example, I think this is the classic story that we should learn from it, no? Nung nangyari yung Scarborough Shoal noong 2012, kaya nagkaroon tayo ng landmark case on the Hague ruling dahil doon yung isa yung pinakaugat noon, no? Dahil sa bagal ng proseso ng pagdedesisyon natin.
Okay.
Nakita natin
Dr. CABALZA, may I interrupt you? I'd like to inform you that members of the Diplomatic Corps are watching us today. So might as well talk in English.
All right. Okay, I'll do that. Okay. We should learn from our experience. No, I'd like to cite the example of the 2012 Scarborough Shoal because at the time the Philippines was not prepared on how to handle such situation. It was a crisis management situation. Now, what is the repercussion of that? At the time when our fishing vessels were inside the Scarborough Shoal, and the Philippine government, particularly the Philippine Navy and the Coast Guard, were in control of that shoal. There was miscommunication on how we handle the situation. Although, of course, we really would want to settle that situation immediately. But unfortunately, because of some deception and some of the strong messages coming from Beijing at the time, the Philippines was not able to handle it correctly.
Properly?
That's why we asked for the intervention of Washington. And of course, that led to the infamous Hague ruling. Okay, now let's translate that to what is happening right now. We saw some of the bigger vessels coming from the Chinese Coast Guards. Some would say that it's a military militia coming from, of course, from the part of the PRC or the People's Liberation Army. But what's the lesson that we can learn from this, from what happened recently? One is that China continuously is trying to flex its muscle, and I think that was also a direct result of what happened in the recent conversation of Washington and Beijing in Alaska, because there was no resolution on how they would handle their issues and problems, particularly on the claims on the contested islands. And of course, it took a boomerang effect. I mean, there was a domino effect,
Okay.
particularly on how other countries, particularly the Philippines, experience this kind of fear. And secondly, I think it is also a result of the enactment of the
Coast Guard law.
Coast Guard law of China, which was implemented only recently in February 1. And it's more than a month now. And really, China would want to hold the attention of the international community that they are really serious about it. Now, it's not only about fear or stage presence that China would want to execute in that stage, but basically, they also would want to send a message, a strong message to the US and to its allies that, come on, we are serious about this and we want that the US, particularly, of course, the Washington would recognize us as co-equal. Because during that conversation 3 days ago, China felt disappointed because it seems like Washington has not learned its lesson from the previous administration. They think that Beijing is still a follower of Washington, being the U.S. remains to be the superpower. But right
Mm-hmm.
now, they really would want to tell to the world, and particularly to Washington, that we are co-equals now. And we have respect begets respect. You have to respect us and follow some of the rules here. Now there were issues on the protocols, diplomatically speaking, during that conversation. And of
Okay.
course, the intention of their meeting is to discuss about climate change and of course the global public health situation.
Mm-hmm.
But because of some unresolved, unfinished business coming from Beijing and Washington, their behaviors erupted differently during that Alaska conference.
Okay. Let me ask you. I'd like to believe the incident took place March 7th, and the
Correct.
meeting between Wang Yi and Mr. Blinken happened just a couple of days ago. So chances are the militia or the fishing vessels CFVs were already in our
Right. This
exclusive economic zone.
right, right.
So it would appear that China has long prepared for any
Agree.
eventuality.
I
Okay.
totally agree with you, sir, because I think that has been a basic strategy of China. No, we remember that even before something would happen, they have Plan B or Plan C. Meaning to say that if this plan will not succeed, generally they have to rethink of another alternative on how to counter the U.S. strength. No, I think another lesson that we should learn from this kind of confrontational um, military strength coming from China is that um, diplomacy is not always the answer. So China invests on military might and economic prowess. So meaning to say that if diplomacy will not work, which they tried recently, there are other means and it will justify what they want because basically they really would want to control the entirety of the South China Sea. And definitely, as long as there are challengers, particularly from uh, actors that are not claimant states in the South China Sea, then China will try its best, no, to control that jurisdiction.
Mm.
Of course, we know for a fact that China cannot get in so the US cannot get in so much because there are limitations in their engagements. One is that the US is not a claimant country of the South China Sea.
Yes.
Secondly, of course, they only would want to push for the fund of
Freedom
freedom
of navigation.
navigation. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a universal principle basically, and I think China also believes in that kind of
Yes.
principle. And
But
secondly,
definitely, yeah. But don't you think it's also a bit puzzling because did I get it right that the U.S. is not part of UNCLOS?
right, that's the second comment that I really would want to emphasize here. That China is criticizing the United States that you're not a
UNCLOS.
signatory of the UNCLOS. Then how come that you are partaking in this kind of discussion dialogue so far? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason why Beijing is also critical in Washington's interventions in some of the domestic policies of China because I think that's how they would also attack um, China in the first place. One of the things that they disagreed during the recent conversation was the human rights abuses of China towards Xinjiang, Hong Kong,
And the
and
Uyghur,
also
no?
right, and the cyber attacks in Taiwan. So those are were some of the disagreements that came out during the conversation last time. But when it comes to climate change, to global pandemic, they are on the same table. I mean, they are on the same
Yeah,
page of their
they're on
discussion.
the same plane.
Right. Yeah. So meaning to say that the only disagreement there are the uh, policies towards China and on the South China Sea. Meaning to
Mm-hmm.
say that China is still in disagreement with Washington on how they perceive China, because as of the moment, the U.S. still thinks that China is their major competitor and still has issues on the UN. Of course, they are using human rights abuses as part of their on how they would counter China here. So it pains China for that matter, because basically they thought that the foreign policies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump would be a different foreign policy to what Joe Biden would
Wow.
exercise over China here.
Okay. But where will that leave the Philippines?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, that's the reason why China is trying its best to get the attention of Manila right now, for the reasons that one, in terms of the economic development, they are really supporting the government's infrastructure program. I think that is a soft stance on how they could soften the government's, of course, hard call over hard stance on China. Secondly, there's a current global pandemic right now, and China would want to believe that if they could help the Philippines, then perhaps Manila could be their ally in the future, and they
Mhm.
are also aware that there would be a national elections next year in the Philippines.
Yes.
It's the reason why they are very aggressive in terms of their interventions and their support to the Philippines.
Okay.
Thirdly, the for me, I think that Manila has become like a guinea pig for Beijing, for the reasons that they saw how the Philippines was very adamant on its claims on national sovereignty and territorial integrity uh, towards the West Philippine Sea. And of course, we won the Hague ruling, and that
Hmm.
cannot be underestimated. They thought that the Philippines will not do something like that. But we saw that from 2016 until 2019, before the ramming, there
Hmm.
were serious issues in terms of the bilateral relationship of the Philippines and China.
Yeah, Dr. Cabalza, let me ask you this. How would the Philippines differ with that of Indonesia,
Right.
with that of Malaysia, and with that of Vietnam? Because I do remember then presidential candidate Rodrigo Duterte said he would take a jet ski and plant the Philippine flag in an islet somewhere in the South China Sea. And after he won, President Widodo took an Indonesian Navy ship and went to the questionable or the islands in question. So where does that leave us?
Okay, I really like that kind of allegory there, because there will be elections next year. So I think that our candidates will make a grand standing and promises by next year again. And
Yeah, where
definitely that
the
was a
circus will be coming to town anyway.
definitely. So we saw that our president gave a promise to the people of cementing our flag there, but it took a while because he was trying to test the waters at the time, and because everyone was observing him. Of course, other leaders from Southeast Asia were also observing him and his actions and policies, because of at the time we were like the man of the hour because of the Hague ruling at the time. It
Yeah.
came The Hague ruling came out during the first period of the Duterte regime,
Yeah. And
right?
then Foreign Affairs Secretary Jun
last time.
Yatay was
Last,
even criticized, may he rest in peace, was
right,
even criticized for the summer announcement that the Philippines won.
right. And
Why is
even
it that
how,
we don't have any cheering
right,
during
right,
the season?
right. And even how we celebrated our victory was controlled and
I would say
uh,
it's summer.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So we
It's as
saw that
if we lost the basketball game.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As if you won, but you were not. You were deprived of happiness, of celebration, something like that,
Yeah.
right? But of course, I think that was also we should also in our analysis and we should also look at the gestures, not only the pronouncements, and that kind of gesture uh, took an effect on how we would engage China in succeeding years. And we saw
Mhm.
that we had the soft pedal. There was an economic rapprochement, economic and diplomatic rapprochements with Beijing. But that kind of soft action did not translate to what we wanted, actually. We thought that by doing that, Beijing will save uh, our relationship with them, and um, they will not touch some of our claimed territories. But it seems like the continuous ramming militia incidents and threats, economic threats, uh, and also some of the naval and aerial threats coming from Beijing were, were, were continuously at place and present. So meaning to say that our relationship with Beijing has not yet been managed well. We are still
Mhm.
formulating the best policy on how to engage with Beijing until now.
Okay. Well, I do recall this an experience in 2009. We were in Hanoi. My friend and I were in Hanoi, and at that time, the Philippines was playing Vietnam in football, and the hotel staff said, "We can only wish you luck, but we believe Vietnam will win." So we went to the market, and whenever the Vietnamese players would score, there was uh, a huge cheering in unison from everyone in the market. And then when we reached the hotel after an hour or two, um, the hotel staff said, "We're very sorry, sir. We lost. Your country lost to Vietnam." And I told them, "Don't worry, because we placed our bets on Vietnam." And they could hardly believe, because to them, there's that pride of winning in competition in athletics. How much more in diplomacy? How
Well,
much more in sovereignty?
I agree with you, Sardar, because it has an effect on our robust strategic culture, if there is such a thing
Uh-uh.
in the Philippines. Because basically, it all boils down on how we execute that strategy in terms
Yeah.
of our culture here. But really, it pains us because if Vietnam, the same as at the time, we are even economically more advanced compared to Vietnam at the time. But
At the time.
militarily speaking, they have a very intergenerational, strong strategic culture. Maybe because of their historical experience with wars and conflicts with China. That's the
Yeah.
reason why they have that kind of grit and determination to win. Unlike
Mhm.
with the Philippines, where we have this kind
So
of
it was easy.
something. Yeah, it is easy for us. Meaning to say, what is the effect of that? Meaning to say that the Philippines has not established a strong strategic culture in terms of our external security. That has been a long debate so far in the Philippines. Secondly, our leaders are also not familiar with national security.
Really?
That has been a problem with some of our national leaders. They take it for granted, even our policymakers at the time. And thirdly, our military is so internal centric in terms of their operations. Maybe we could blame it also because of our dependence so much with
The
our
United
United,
States.
right, with the United States.
Uh-huh.
That's the reason why our external capabilities to secure our sovereignty and territory has not been ingrained to
Okay.
our soldiers and particularly the armed forces of the
Yeah.
Philippines. So
Uh,
this is the responsibility.
I do recall the Philippines was really a pawn in the Cold War
Mm.
because during the time of President Diosdado Macapagal, may he rest in peace, there was a basketball team from Yugoslavia who was supposed to play with the Philippines on goodwill games. And we banned them because they're communists. And then the United States fed elementary school children with bulgur wheat, with flour, with jello coming from the Cooperative American Relief everywhere. I recall that because during my elementary grades at P. Zamora Elementary School in Pasay, we would have American diplomats watching us consume the relief goods during snack time. No? You know, I don't think it was a good approach, but definitely if you feed people, then chances are your mindset would be, this is a good guy because they feed us. Especially now with the trust rating that most Filipinos trust the United States than China, which is a neighbor, no?
This is my recommendation in the post-Duterte administration because if it seems that this kind of scenarios will still keep on going.
Excuse
Uh,
me, Professor. You're
yes,
talking
sir.
about post-Duterte scenario.
Scenario. This is
Uh,
what I would suggest.
what if the Duterte administration would go on?
Continues. That's another thing.
Okay.
Maybe the daughter will continue it.
Okay. Anyway, whether we like it or
This
not,
is my suggestion
okay.
so far. Manila should institutionalize a national territorial defense framework. What do I mean for that? One is that if we have seen our defense policies from 2000 until 2021, there was a intermittent actions in terms of our policy making in the defense and security sector. Meaning to say, policymakers in that sector were calling for the submission and implementation of the defense military or defense strategy or the national security policy or the national security strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So it was done intermittently. Now that almost all of those policies were already written and we know the situations now, then there must be an overarching national, um, how would I say it, national territorial defense framework so that it will harmonize all of the policies that were crafted, created, and implemented from 2000 until 2021. Because this will give us now the strength on how to solve our problems.
Is it
Meaning,
not too late?
it's late, but I think there are still room for improvement because basically, like what I said, it took us only recently to have that kind of problem with China or meaning that kind of scenario or situation. Unlike with Vietnam, they have intergenerational, centuries old love hate relationship with Beijing, so they know how to engage with Beijing. But us, we were only given the kind of problem only way back in 2000 or even during, of course, in 90s. So I think it's only a recent memory for us. So, but I'm not saying that our defense and security sector is not doing something. I think this is the right time now that we have those elements, good policies. We are acquiring defense material, hardware, and now we only need a good leader to execute all of these policies.
Uh-huh.
And I think hardware in order for us to counter also. We're not claiming that we will win in case there would be war. But what we only want here is that we could at least prevent such insecurities again with
Mhm.
our territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Okay, very well. I'd like to acknowledge our viewers from the United States, from Saudi Arabia, from Quezon City, and from Bicol, and from the Diplomatic Corps. Okay, uh, if we look forward, have you seen any among those dreaming of becoming presidents to have an inkling or iota of knowledge in strategic defense studies?
So far, I know some, perhaps five candidates who will, I think, will run for the presidency. But I doubt that all of them have that iota and knowledge when it comes to national security. For the reason that I've been listening to some of their pronouncements and maybe some of their messages in their political stance and principles so far. It seems
Mhm.
that they don't have enough policies, or they are not engaging so much with our security and defense sector on how to handle our security problems so far, external defense particularly, and including the internal security that we have so far
Mhm.
here. Because the problem here is that we have a protracted internal security problem also when it comes to insurgency. That has been a problem. How come that we have not yet resolved when in fact our Southeast Asian countries were able to do that back in 80s and 90s? So
Mhm.
this is a huge problem for us, and vis-a-vis with our external defense also, because until now we don't have a right formula or policy on how to engage with Beijing, because basically we are being dwarfed by these two titans, competing
Okay.
superpowers, the United States and China here. Now, what is the interest of the Philippines? It seems like we're getting attraction and attention coming from these two powers,
Mhm.
because it seems like they are trying to influence our policies and our politicians also on how to
Yeah.
engage with
Yeah.
them. But I think if we only know our interests and what are the interests of the Philippines, the interest is, of course, we need to modernize our armed forces. We need to of course, obey rules-based policy laws based from our constitution. And then we have to safeguard our people, particularly our fishermen who are also have interest in the bounties in our exclusive economic zones.
Yeah.
And fourthly, I think in order for us to have a good strategic partnership with Beijing and continue our alliance with the United States, they also have these two countries will also have to recognize our interest, and of course will respect our sovereignty, meaning to say that there should be no incursions anymore,
Yeah.
and of course our armed forces also should play its role in defending our territory.
Yeah. One thing is sure. I do recall last year, the flag officer in command of the Philippine Navy, a good friend, Vice Admiral Joby Bacardo, said, if and when we get to confront the Chinese, we will not fire the first shot because if we do, we will be at the losing end. So, if the Chinese or any other foreign vessel would fire on the Philippine Navy, at the bar of public opinion, they stand to lose. How do you look at such an idea?
I think that is a universal practice that if you even notice China is doing the same thing. Remember during some of the skirmishes in the West Philippine Sea, instead of firing some cannonballs or what, they use water,
Water. Yeah.
water. Yeah, because basically that is a basic rule in any conflict, that you don't start any war or conflict. You become more of defensive over offensive. And
Mm-hmm.
all of these countries are observing that, whether it's big or small powers.
So all you
So
need is a happy trigger guy to start the fighting.
that's it. I think they are aware of that. Even with the China Coast Guard law, China is aware of that. Even if this debate right now is on the use of force, we are so wary and afraid that China will use that use of force. But China, Beijing in particular, is also aware of that rule that don't ever start any war, any conflict. Don't offend. You just spoil their attention, something like that.
Uh-huh. Okay. Let's go back a bit. There's this 1951 Mutual
Yeah.
Defense Treaty.
Mm.
Do you think it needs to be negotiated, or do we have to end it?
Yeah, it should be negotiated because I think that's one of the foundations of our defense relations and pact with the United States. Because, of course, in security, it's ever evolving and changing. There are some agreements that there are some features there that should be replicated also. I mean, that should be changed, no?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess there are other, it can stand alone, meaning to say that despite that there are other succeeding agreements after the MDT Mutual Defense Treaty, like the Visiting Forces Agreement and of course the EDCA Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, that major treaty with the United States can stand alone. But how will it become effective? Because the VFA and the EDCA will operationalize the effectivity of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Meaning to
Mm-hmm.
say that the defense treaty there are just general agreements on the part of the United States and the Philippines that if something would happen between these two countries, they have to support each other. That was only the gist of the agreement there. But in toto, most of the specific agreements were seen in the Visiting Forces Agreement and also in the EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So I think that the holism of these three agreements will work together if they are also updated and of course were updated, and of course it should also be agreed upon by two parties, because generally we saw some imbalances and asymmetrical agreements in terms of the implementation of these treaties and defense pact. That's why there were concerns and complaints, particularly coming from the end of the Philippines, because they saw some unjust and unfair implementations, particularly when there are circumstances that the sovereignty and the welfare of the Filipinos were at stake here.
Yeah. Can we really depend on the United States? Because it says in the agreement that an attack on an ally would be an attack to the United States as well.
Right.
How do
I
you look
think
at it?
we should learn from our history. That's the reason why we have a weak defense posture in our external defense, because we valued so much our defense treaty with the United States. And then when there were um, problems that rose from the current situation right now, it seems like that there are questions that we cannot depend much from the United States. I think the best way now is to uh, beef up our own naval arsenal and strengthen our armed forces. That's the reason why we have the modernization process. It took
Yeah.
from the Ramos administration to the Benigno Aquino administration, and now we are still on that process,
You
and
know,
that will end until the two next presidents of the
yeah.
Philippines.
If I recall, during our recent interview where former Defense Secretary Orly Mercado
Yeah,
was with us, you also mentioned that Vietnam and
yes,
Indonesia and Malaysia
Indonesia
never
don't
had
have
treaty
defense.
allies.
Right. I think it goes with their history that they don't have they invested on their indigenous defense posture, meaning to say that they could not rely to any big powers or to any major powers. That's the reason why they have to invest um, based from their foreign policy, that because of their non-alignment at the time, and of course Vietnam being a socialist country, it could not get any support from other countries. So that's the reason why they have invested on their indigenous capabilities. Now,
Yeah.
with the Philippines, there was a reverse of what happened compared to our Southeast Asian countries, because we depended so much with big powers and forgetting that we could not we should have invested and became resilient also. Otherwise, look at what happened now with the Philippines. We were shattered and broken because of our over-reliance with major powers.
Yeah, okay. And we must also take into consideration that American economy is not as stable as it was decades
Right,
ago.
right. Yeah, yeah. And but of course, the Americans are also trying that we can revive they can revive their economy. And of course, by trying to invest with their alliances, of course, they have the Quad, and of course the European Union supporting them. They think that of course their economy would still go on and will continue to be more sustainable. But of course, reality wise, the changing economic models are keen right now, and it seems like the Beijing model has been economic model has been successful than the other models that we are seeing right now, and that's the reason why Washington should also wake up from its current confusion right now, bafflement because of these new developments. And I
Mhm.
think the Asia Pacific slash Indo Pacific will become the major region in the world to gain more economic successes, because this is where economic engines and economic activities will continue in the succeeding decades or so.
Mhm. If I recall, during the late 80s, then Senator Leti Ramos Shahani, speaking before the KBP in Albay province, said something like, "You better watch out because the Malacca Strait may be a focal point in the regional security." But it turned out that it's not the Malacca Strait, but the South China Sea
Right, right,
today.
right.
Why is
Because
it so?
all right, because at the time, the exploration on the South China Sea were not yet that extensive. It was
Ah,
only recent that they saw the potential of the South China Sea, meaning to say that because of our marine scientists and some investors on the oil exploration, they saw the potential, and of course the navigation,
uh-huh. The
potential
traffic.
navigation, yeah, the traffic in that region. So because there are new highways now, the SLOCs, the sea lanes of communications, they saw that it's one of the busiest so far. That
Yeah.
if you compute all of those gains that we can get from that region, from that waters, the South China Sea, I'm referring, you could be the most powerful so far in
Really?
the world.
Okay.
So it took them, geography taught us that geoeconomics is very important now. And then the South China Sea could be a jewel that
Okay.
whoever will control the South China Sea will become the most powerful on it.
And will control the region.
Right, definitely.
Yeah,
That
because
will
whether you
emanate,
like it
the
or
power will emanate from that region basically.
yeah, whether you like it or not, the fuel that Japan needs will have to pass by the South China
Right,
Sea.
right, right.
The fuel that China needs will have to pass by the South China Sea.
I agree. I agree. Yes.
Okay. So that being the case, you mentioned that you haven't heard any of the presidential timbers,
Mm.
or we may also include the presidential toothpicks, say anything sensible so far. But you know what is important is you talked of modernization, and it has something to do with appropriation.
Yeah,
And appropriations come from the House of Representatives
that's
and
the point.
concurred into by the Senate.
There's a lesson that I want to impart here,
Please.
especially for the lower house. When we first pitched the modernization program under the Ramos administration, there was a 10-year program supposedly for that first phase of the modernization program of the armed forces. But
Okay.
it took 7 years for legislation to approve it. Imagine that 7 years that could have been given for the armed forces to strengthen their force.
Uh-huh.
And then you only have 3 years to implement it. So, being to say, the defense and security sector was also disappointed because of the inaction and greed of our politicians at the time, our legislators.
Yeah.
That is something that we should learn from it also.
Okay. There will be a very good explanation to that.
Mm.
because if you strengthen the armed forces, it will
Yes,
mean lesser roads and bridges.
I
And
agree.
money is synonymous with more roads and bridges, right?
I agree. I agree.
Where can you get the money from commissions if you buy airplane?
That's
Unless you.
another pointer. Yeah, I get the pointer in that conversation there. Because one also at the time our economic performance was not sterling, was not good.
Yeah, you had the
Yeah,
Asian
yeah,
financial crisis.
yeah. We had financial crisis at that time. And secondly, I think um, the reason why it took so long for the Congress to pass that law is also um, they are not aware of what is happening in the South China Sea already. At the time, we have karaoke diplomacy with Beijing. Of course, our former president at the time was
Yeah.
having with the former president of China. So our relations with China at the time was as it is on its peak, no, golden years at the time. So when you say there was no problem, we never thought that the People's Liberation Army will have its grand strategy on how to claim it. So we were surprised also.
Uh-huh. But you studied at the PLA
Yeah, yeah,
Academy. Uh, how do they look at the resources at the South China Sea? Because resources would also be synonymous to strategy and power and
right, right, right.
influence.
They want it. They've been studying it. That's why they are claiming it through historical claims. The reason why they use historical claims there,
Like
because
the
that
nine
is
dash
the best
line.
tool for them to get support from the international community without exuding any military force. But while doing that, they are also modernizing the People's Liberation Army. So it was placed hand in hand, meaning to say that while they are thinking, lobbying for the historical claims for the South China Sea, at the same time, they are also strengthening their People's Liberation Army because they learned from their mistakes. They knew that they are weak at the time. So the only way for them to achieve those dreams is by um, putting arms, and of course by of course reforming their armed forces also. It took a while, but it's good that they have paramount leaders who could turn around the story. And really, they are very focused when it comes to the military might of the People's Liberation Army because of their historical insecurities also. They had the 100 years of humiliation,
Okay.
and really they would want to change that kind of narrative. And if you see their vision, really, they really would want to become the number one country in the world.
Very interesting. So
Mm.
I guess the most important word to describe what you ever said about China and its leaders is the term or the word consistency.
Right,
They've always been consistent, and just like Vietnam, they have long range plans,
right,
which I guess we don't have, because even our development plans in the Philippines are focused on the medium term and not on the long term, because the legacy of a sitting president would always be paramount. Like this time, it's the build, build, build. No, during Tita Cori's time, it was agrarian reform, things like that.
right. And that shows that we have a weak defense, a weak strategic culture, because that also um, is part of forms part of that strategy. We need to say that I've observed that our policies has a 6 year lifespan, meaning to say that it will only survive for 6 years, and there's another new one for the next 6 years because of the changing political climate that we have in the Philippines. The lesson that we should gain from that is that there should be institutionalization. There should be institutionalizations of policies,
Hmm.
regardless of the leader who will rule the country.
Okay.
Because that's part of our political culture. That
Of
every
course.
6 years we have no president.
Yeah. Given a chance to ask presidential timbers and toothpicks, I would like to ask them how they look at geopolitics.
Right, right.
It's
They should
very
have
important.
some examinations on that before they run for office.
No, 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 no. It's against the Constitution. Somebody told me it's more difficult to be a policeman than become president of the Philippines.
Right, right.
So, it's easier to become president because as long as you can read, write, and probably
Yeah,
walk on your two feet or
yeah.
whatever, it's okay. Well, we had good presidents, we had bad presidents. We can only hope that we choose something or someone who would steer the country out of Egypt, so to speak, no, from
Right, right.
slavery. Let me ask you: you have an event coming up? I
Yes,
saw a poster.
I have my organization will have its first global lecture series, and the aim of this is to gather academics, artists, politicians, leaders, policymakers, and scientists around the world to share their knowledge for a global understanding. And this coming March 24, that's March 23 in Washington, D.C. The guest will be Dr. Ottaviano Canuto. He was the former World Bank Vice President and now a non-resident fellow of the Brookings Institution. So we are very lucky to have him as our first
Speaker.
lecturer, yeah, distinguished
Yeah.
lecturer for that online
And he will talk about.
we will be talking about international development, the current the developments in the global economy and the pandemic.
Really, very interesting.
Very
How
interesting.
how could our viewers watch and learn from it?
We will open the link. I will put that of course in our Facebook page and some of our social media accounts so that everyone can also watch it. But it will be recorded just like what we're doing right now. So
No, this is
uh,
live.
this is live also,
Yeah.
right? This is the innovation that we're trying to initiate because right now not all have the chance to, of course, to get
To watch at the same
right, to
time.
watch it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at their own pacing.
Yeah. Just to give you an advance info, there will be no more Facebook Live effective April 16.
For the reason
So
of
no more Facebook Live according to the management. So we
okay,
will have to try and find other platforms.
right, right,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, what's your message to people who watch developments, for people who dream of becoming presidents? And I can only hope that their dreams would not end in nightmare for the people of the Republic of the Philippines.
Right. When we dream, we should always remember that we should know what we want because sometimes it's easy to wish for something, and when you have it, you don't know how to do it, or it's so dangerous to be up there. But what I want to tell to those dreaming to serve our country and to lead our country is that you listen to your people, and of course always defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, so that by doing this, that would emanate into some other dimensions also, particularly in alleviating poverty, marginalization, and some other issues that we still have. Um, we still have in the Philippines. You know, we have a very comprehensive security in the Philippines because of the many insecurities the country is experiencing right now, and it gives us that feeling that how come that despite all the dreaming, all the support that we wanted to have, we all the change that we wanted for this country, it seems like the Philippines is not um, arriving as a nation state. And I think the
Mhm.
problem there is that we should do something, reform some of the erroneous policies, and of course, we should act on it, listen to the people, and of course, let's have a pure heart in serving the people. So
Okay.
I think that is my message to those who would want
You,
to
you
serve
know,
their
I'd like
country.
to end our coffee chat with a quote from a man named Oliver Cromwell. And
Mm.
this would apply to people who will run for the presidency and for those who will win the presidency and the vice presidency and the Senate. And the quotation is simple. It says, "Do not trust the cheering, for those persons would shout as much if you or I were going to be hanged." Okay? Ulitin ko lang. Do not trust the cheering, for those persons would shout as much if you or I were going to be hanged. Huwag kayong maniwalang masyado sa Alleluia chorus na nakapaligid sa inyo. Panay ang papuri dahil nasa pwesto kayo, pero pag nawala na kayo sa pwesto at makukulong na kayo, hindi mo na makikita ang mga yan. Magandang araw, Dr. Chester CABALZA. It's a pleasure to have you on our coffee chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Melo.
Salamat po sa ulitin. Good luck on your schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.